I caught him watching me from across the pool deck, his gaze lingering on the curve of my hip as water dripped from my bikini. Richard wasn't supposed to look at me like that. He was my best friend's father. But when our eyes met, something electric sparked between us, and I didn't look away. The heat wasn't just from the summer sun anymore. His fingers brushed mine as he handed me a towel, the touch lasting a heartbeat too long, and I felt my breath catch. Avery was right there, laughing on her phone, completely oblivious to the tension crackling in the air between her father and me. That should have stopped me. It didn't. If you're already hooked, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. Now let's dive deeper. I'd known Avery since college, but this was my first time visiting her family's estate in the Hamptons. The house was everything you'd expect. Sprawling, elegant, the kind of place where secrets could hide in shadowy corners and no one would hear you whisper. Richard had always been charming during our brief encounters when he'd visit campus, but here, in his element, he was something else entirely. Confident, magnetic, dangerous in the way that successful older men often are. The first night, we all had dinner on the terrace. The conversation flowed easily. Wine, laughter, stories about Avery's childhood that made her groan with embarrassment. But underneath it all, I felt his attention like a physical weight. When he leaned forward to refill my glass, his fingers grazed my wrist. When he laughed at something I said, his eyes held mine just a beat too long. Avery was busy texting someone, completely absorbed in her phone, missing every charged moment between us. Olivia's studying psychology, Avery mentioned absently, not looking up from her screen. Is that so? Richard's voice carried genuine interest, but there was something else there too, something that made my skin prickle with awareness. What draws you to understanding how people's minds work? I swirled my wine, aware of how his gaze seemed to catalog every movement. I'm fascinated by what drives people to make the choices they do, especially the ones they know they shouldn't. His smile was slow, knowing. Those are often the most interesting choices, aren't they? The air between us thickened. I felt my cheeks flush, and not from the wine. Later that evening, after Avery had gone to bed claiming exhaustion from too much sun, I found myself unable to sleep. The house was quiet, moonlight streaming through the tall windows as I padded downstairs in my silk nightgown. I'd intended to grab some water from the kitchen, but the soft glow from the library caught my attention. Richard was there, sitting in a leather armchair with a book in his lap, but his eyes weren't on the pages. They were on me the moment I appeared in the doorway. Couldn't sleep either. His voice was low, intimate in the darkness. I shook my head, suddenly very aware of how little the thin silk covered. The house is so quiet, it's different from the city. Come in, he said, setting his book aside. I find the library has a calming effect. I should have said goodnight, should have gone back upstairs. Instead, I stepped inside, the thick carpet soft beneath my bare feet. The room smelled of leather and aged paper, masculine and sophisticated, like him. What are you reading? I asked, moving closer to where he sat. He held up the book, something about architecture. Research for a project, but I have to admit I'm having trouble concentrating tonight. Why's that? He stood slowly, his full height imposing in the dim light. I think you know why. My heart hammered against my ribs as he stepped closer. This was wrong on every level I could think of, but my body didn't seem to care about propriety. Every nerve ending was alive, hyper-aware of his proximity. Richard. I started, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. I know, he said softly. I know exactly how inappropriate this is. You're my daughter's friend. You're young. He reached out, his fingers barely grazing my cheek. Beautiful. I leaned into his touch before I could stop myself. We shouldn't. No, he agreed, but his thumb traced along my jawline. We absolutely shouldn't. Neither of us moved away. The tension that had been building all day reached a breaking point. When he cupped my face in his hands, I didn't resist. When he lowered his head toward mine, I rose on my tiptoes to meet him halfway. The first brush of his lips was tentative, questioning. I answered by pressing closer. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding into my hair as I gripped the front of his shirt. He tasted like the expensive whiskey he'd been nursing, warm and intoxicating. My body molded against his, feeling the solid strength of his chest, the way his breathing had turned uneven. God, Olivia, he breathed against my lips. Do you have any idea what you do to me? I did, because he was doing the same thing to me. Every logical thought in my head was drowning in the flood of want coursing through my veins. When his hands skimmed down my sides, tracing the silk that clung to my curves, I felt like I might combust from the inside out. He backed me gently against the wall of bookshelves, his body caging me in. The leather spines pressed cool against my back, a stark contrast to the heat radiating from him. His lips found my neck, pressing soft kisses along the sensitive skin there, and I couldn't suppress the soft sound that escaped me. Shh, he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. We have to be quiet. The reminder of where we were, of who might hear us, should have brought me back to my senses. Instead, it only added to the thrill. The danger of it, the secrecy, made every touch feel more intense. His hands were reverent as they explored, tracing the outline of my silhouette through the thin fabric. When his fingers found the hem of my nightgown, I held my breath, waiting. He looked into my eyes, searching for permission, for any sign that I wanted him to stop. I didn't. The silk whispered as he lifted it, his palms warm against my newly exposed skin. I'd never felt so desired, so wanted, as I did under his careful attention. Every touch was deliberate, worshipful, like he was memorizing the feel of me. When he dropped to his knees before me, my legs nearly gave out. His hands steadied me, holding my hips as he looked up at me with such intensity that I felt it like a physical touch. Beautiful, he murmured. And then his mouth was on me. I bit my lip hard to keep from crying out, my hands fisting in his hair as waves of sensation crashed over me. He was patient, thorough, taking his time to learn what made me gasp, what made my body tremble. The combination of his skill and the forbidden nature of what we were doing had me spiraling toward the edge, embarrassingly quickly. Please, I whispered, not even sure what I was begging for. He seemed to understand, his attention becoming more focused, more intent. When the first wave hit me, I had to press my hand over my mouth to muffle my cry. He held me steady as I shook, his touch gentling me through the aftershocks. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Richard rose slowly, his hands still soothing on my trembling legs, his eyes dark with want, but also with something that might have been regret. Olivia, A sound from upstairs froze us both. Footsteps, moving down the hall. Liv, are you downstairs? Avery's voice, thick with sleep but getting closer. Panic shot through me as Richard stepped back, helping me smooth down my nightgown with quick, efficient movements. He retreated to his chair, grabbing his book, while I tried to compose myself and think of a reasonable explanation for why I was in the library at midnight. In here, I called back, hoping my voice sounded normal. Couldn't sleep, so I was looking for something to read. Avery appeared in the doorway, squinting in the dim light. Her hair was messy from sleep, and she looked adorably rumpled in her oversized t-shirt. Oh, hey, Dad, she said, noticing Richard in his chair. You're up late, too. Couldn't put this down, he said, holding up his book. His voice was perfectly steady, giving nothing away. You know how I get with a good architectural study. Avery rolled her eyes. Nerd. Find anything good, Liv? I grabbed a random book from the shelf behind me, still looking. Your family has an amazing collection. Cool. Well, I'm going back to bed. Don't stay up too late, you two. She patted away, leaving us alone again. But the moment was broken, the spell shattered by the reminder of reality. I set the book back on the shelf with shaking hands. I should go, I whispered. Richard nodded, though his eyes held a heat that suggested he wanted anything but for me to leave. Probably best. I started toward the door, then paused. Richard. I know, he said quietly. I know this complicates everything. I nodded and slipped out of the library, my legs still unsteady as I climbed the stairs. Behind me, I could hear him moving around, probably trying to compose himself the same way I was trying to. Back in my room, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body still humming from his touch. What had I done? What were we doing? Avery was my best friend, and with her father. The guilt warred with the lingering desire, creating a cocktail of emotions I didn't know how to process. The next morning dawned bright and beautiful, as if the previous night had been nothing more than a vivid dream. I came down to breakfast to find Avery already at the table, scrolling through her phone while picking at a croissant. Morning, sleepyhead, she said without looking up. Dad's already gone to his morning meeting, something about a new resort project. I felt a mix of relief and disappointment that I wouldn't have to face him immediately. Did you sleep better? Like a rock. That ocean air knocks me out every time. She looked up then, studying my face. You look tired, though. Did you ever find a book last night? Yeah, but I didn't read much of it. That at least was true. The day passed in a haze of normal summer activities, lounging by the pool, walking on the beach, chatting about everything and nothing. But underneath it all, I was hyper-aware of every shadow, every sound, wondering when Richard would return and what would happen when he did. He came back just as we were having lunch on the terrace. He looked perfectly composed in his business, attire, every inch the successful architect and devoted father. When his eyes met mine over Avery's head, there was nothing in his expression to suggest anything had happened between us. Nothing except for the way his gaze lingered just a moment too long on my lips. How was your morning, girls? He asked, settling into his chair. Boring, Avery replied. We need to do something more exciting tonight. Maybe go into town, hit some of the bars? Sounds fun, I managed, though the idea of normalcy felt surreal after the night before. Richard was quiet through lunch, contributing to the conversation when spoken to but otherwise seeming lost in thought. I found myself studying his hands as he cut his food, remembering how they'd felt on my skin. The memory sent heat pooling low in my stomach. That afternoon, while Avery was napping, I found myself wandering the house restlessly. I ended up in the library again, drawn back to the scene of my surrender like a moth to flame. The room looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more mundane. But I could still feel the ghost of his touch, could still remember the way he'd looked at me like I was something precious. Having second thoughts, I spun around to find him in the doorway, jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, looking less formal than he had at lunch. My heart started racing all over again. About what? I asked, though we both knew what he meant. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. About last night. About this thing between us. I should be, I admitted. Avery is my best friend. This could ruin everything. It could, he agreed, moving closer. Are you going to tell her? The question hung in the air between us. Was I? Could I? The thought of confessing to Avery made my stomach churn, but the alternative, keeping this secret, felt equally impossible. I don't know, I whispered. He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. I can't stop thinking about you, he said quietly. About how you felt, how you tasted. My breath hitched. Richard, I know it's wrong. I know it's complicated. But I can't pretend it didn't happen. And I can't pretend I don't want it to happen again. Before I could respond, before I could think about all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, he was kissing me again. This kiss was different from the night before, more urgent, more desperate. His hands fisted in my hair as I melted against him, all my reservations dissolving under the heat of his mouth. We were like teenagers, grabbing at each other with barely contained need. His hands roamed over my body, reacquainting themselves with my curves while I tugged at his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against mine. When he lifted me onto the desk, scattering papers, I wrapped my legs around his waist and pulled him closer. We can't, I panted against his lips, even as my body arched into his touch. I know, he growled, his hands sliding under my sundress. But I need you, Olivia. I need to feel you. His fingers found me ready for him, and we both groaned at the contact. He stroked me slowly, deliberately, watching my face as pleasure built inside me. When I reached for his belt, he caught my wrist. Not here, he said, though his voice was strained. Too risky. He was right, but stopping felt impossible when my body was screaming for more. As if reading my thoughts, he dropped to his knees, again pushing my dress up and settling between my thighs. This time, there was no gentle exploration. He knew exactly what I needed, and he gave it to me with single-minded focus. I had to bite down on my hand to keep from screaming as the climax tore through me, my body convulsing around his skillful tongue. He didn't stop until I was gasping, oversensitive and shaking. God, you're incredible, he breathed, pressing kisses to my inner thighs as I tried to catch my breath. The sound of a car in the driveway made us both freeze. Avery, back from town earlier than expected. We sprang apart, frantically straightening clothes and trying to look composed. Richard moved to the window while I slid off the desk on unsteady legs, my body still thrumming from his attention. She's getting something from her car, he said, his voice tight. You should go upstairs. I'll stay here and look like I'm working. I nodded, moving toward the door on shaking legs. As I passed him, he caught my arm. Tonight, he said, his eyes intense. After she goes to sleep, my room. I should have said, no. Should have told him we needed to stop this before it went any further. Instead, I found myself nodding, already anticipating the hours until darkness would give us cover again. The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Dinner, conversation, pretending everything was fine while stealing glances across the table. Avery was in high spirits, chattering about her plans for the rest of the week, completely oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around her. When she finally announced she was going to bed, claiming exhaustion from too much sun and shopping, I felt my pulse quicken. Richard's eyes met mine across the table, dark with promise. I think I'll turn in early too, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Lightweights, Avery teased. I'm going to read for a while, so try to keep it down up there. If only she knew how prophetic those words were. I went to my room and waited, counting the minutes until I was sure Avery would be asleep. When I finally crept down the hall to Richard's room, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard through the walls. He was waiting for me, standing by the window in just his boxer shorts, moonlight painting silver streaks across his chest. The sight of him took my breath away. He was beautiful in the way that mature men could be, all clean lines and quiet strength. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said softly. I almost didn't. I closed the door behind me, the soft click seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet house. He moved toward me slowly, giving me time to change my mind, to run. Instead, I met him halfway, reaching up to frame his face with my hands. This is crazy, I whispered. Completely insane, he agreed, then kissed me like he was drowning and I was air. What followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. He worshipped my body with a patience and skill that left me breathless, taking me apart piece by piece until I was nothing but sensation and need. When he finally joined with me, moving with a rhythm that built slowly to something earth-shattering, I understood for the first time what all the fuss was about. We moved together in the darkness, muffling our sounds against each other's skin, the danger of discovery only heightening every sensation. When release finally claimed us both, it was with an intensity that left us clinging to each other, hearts racing, bodies slick with perspiration. Afterward, as we lay tangled in his sheets, reality began to creep back in. What were we doing? Where could this possibly lead? I should go, I whispered, though everything in me wanted to stay wrapped in his arms. Stay a little longer, he murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my back. I wanted to. God, how I wanted to. But the risk was too great. What happens now? I asked as I reluctantly disentangled myself from him. I don't know, he admitted. I've never been in this situation before. Neither had I. As I slipped back to my room, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, or if I'd found something worth the risk. The next morning brought no answers, only more questions. How long could we keep this secret? What would happen when the weekend ended and I had to go back to my real life? And most importantly, what would happen if Avery found out? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where desire overruled logic, where the forbidden felt too good to resist? What would you have done in my place? Confessed everything or kept the secret? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and want to know what you think. And don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications because trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.